And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with yet another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. We've got a big show for you today. I'll let my co-host for the day, who's back from her little sabbatical, Chant Hanna, introduce our guest for today. Chant, welcome back. Long time no hear from you.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's good to be back. Anyway, I wanted to introduce our wonderful guests. We have Tom Whitmore, a board member of MUFON. And we also have Steve Bassett, who I don't really think he needs an introduction. Everybody knows him. I will also actually let Steve introduce himself a little bit and give a little bit of background regarding what he does for us in Washington on our behalf in the UFO community. I wanted to bring up an interesting topic that is trending right now. There was a article that was published on September 23rd, and it was regarding some interesting topic regarding intelligence-related drones that actually flew over one of our warships, and that being the USS Nimitz. So I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from that AP Wire article, and it starts off as Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guard force has managed to fly surveillance drone over the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, which last week transited through the Strait of Hormuz, an Iranian news agency said Wednesday. The semi-official Tasnim news agency, which is considered close to the paramilitary guard, published images of the Nimitz, saying they were taken by Iranian-made drones and showing fighter planes parked on the carrier's deck. I wanted to ask our guests and also Frank regarding their thoughts on this topic. I'd like to start off with Tom Whitmore and ask you, can you please share with us your thoughts on this topic? It sounds like this was a very maybe a high tension type of situation or something that could have turned into a high tension, a geopolitical related situation.
Okay. Good afternoon, Frank, Chant, and Steve, and thank you for having me on the program today. I have done some checking on the internet, and it's apparent to me that there is an undeclared low-intensity warfare going on between the United States and Iran. And as you mentioned, the USS Nimitz, which is a super carrier, and it's part of the Fifth Fleet out of Bahrain. And we want to note that the DoD did not reveal this information. The information came from Iran. They released it. Now, the U.S. News stories mentioned that there were other ships with the U.S. Nimitz, but it was the Iranians who disclosed that those other ships were 2 destroyers, 2 battle cruisers, 2 littoral combat ships, and a Coast Guard cutter. Now, it's interesting that the Iranians have also announced that they've acquired 188 new naval drones and helicopters. And it's apparent that they're getting more and more serious about having a presence in the Persian Gulf. Now, personally, I'm not sure why Iran would want to advertise that they overflew and photographed the Nimitz. They must have some reason for wanting to do that, but they did. Now, we want to remember that the United States essentially assassinated General Qasem Soleimani of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, and another person was killed in addition to that. And General Soleimani was killed by a U.S. Predator drone firing Hellfire missiles. Now, Soleimani has been blamed for attacks in Iraq on December 27th of last year and also on December 31 on the U.S. Embassy. So the United States was very concerned about him, and I think that they believed that he was planning another big attack. Now, last summer, Iran took down a U.S. drone, and the U.S. also shot down an Iranian drone. So there is this war going on behind the scenes that we mostly don't hear about. In fact, President Trump, as I understand it, was inclined to take further military action against Iran when they shot down one of our, probably an unmanned aerial vehicle. But I think he was talked out of that. Now, another interesting thing to remember is that in 2011, United States unmanned aerial vehicle, an RQ-170 Sentinel drone that has a flying wing shape and it looks like a B-2. It either landed or was shot down in Iran. I believe it was in eastern Iran. It's a reconnaissance vehicle. And Iran advertised that they captured it. They had a photograph that they published, and they bragged that they were back engineering it. And they also claimed that they captured some of the data from that vehicle. Now, considering the assassination of General Soleimani, we've also heard a story lately about Iran wanting to get revenge and that there has been a plot to kill the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. Her name is Lana Marks. She was actually born in South Africa, and she speaks at least two African languages, Afrikaans and Xhosa. And now we also want to note that Iran has an extensive network of secret operatives in South Africa, and South Africa has been known to cooperate with Iran. And it's believed that Iran is interested in South Africa because of their uranium deposits. And also, in addition to the ambassador to South Africa, it's been mentioned that General Kenneth McKenzie, the head of the U.S. Central Command, also could be a target for assassination by the Iranians. And last of all, I'd just like to say that this is interesting. Of course, we know that unfriendly countries engage in cyber warfare against the United States. But I also found that it's been mentioned that Iran is conducting a disinformation program on social media against the United States as well.
Thank you very much for having given us your invaluable input on that topic. Wanted to ask Steve Bassett, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I'm hesitant to use the word war. I don't think that we're at war with Iran. We don't have diplomatic relations, and we have been engaged in a series of brinksmanships for some time, and that's well known, coming from both sides. So this is just one more event along those lines. I don't think it's all that serious for a couple of reasons. One, the ship was in international waters, and so they can fly a drone out there if they want to. But we've had more serious engagements with gunships, which were also in international waters. But I think the protocol is that even though you're in international water, if you pose a threat to the carrier, if you get in too close, the carrier can take measures. Right? So in this case, it's a drone. The article indicated a single drone. It doesn't say how big it was. I'm sure the carrier commander is a little embarrassed that they may not have picked it up. You'll also note from the photograph that it is off to the side, slightly forward. So in other words, it's not over the carrier, it's off to the side. Now, depending upon how good that camera is, it could be well off to the side. It could be at substantial distance, and then it's photographing with powerful zoom, which may explain why it wasn't picked up. So all in all, they put a photograph. They're letting us know that we're watching them. It's part of the game. But as compared to other things like the Soleimani assassination, this is trivial. But I think they're also sending a bit of a message during the election season. Though that intrigues me a little bit because I'm quite sure that Iran does not want Trump to win. So something like this could be of help to his campaign. But yeah, who knows? I mean, it's a complicated country and they have a complicated agenda.
Thank you very much for that input. I did want to ask my co-host a question. I just wanted to correct you. Please forgive me. It does state in the article that it was multiple drones. Frank, I wanted to ask you a question, and that is regarding this topic. And that is, we have satellites, multitudes of them in space that are capable of zooming in on somebody's watch if they want to. So knowing that we have the kind of technology that we have, with that high technology, one would assume that we would be able to actually know ahead of time as we see those intelligence-related drones traversing the skies, no matter what skies they are, whatever side of the planet, we would be able to detect them. So I'm sure there's a lot of military chatter, but it doesn't sound like even if we did know that we were stopping it. So what do you think happened?
Well, there's been no comment from the Pentagon on all this. That was key. As you mentioned yourself, that this was information was released by the Iranian news agency. These kind of things, as Steve mentioned, they go on all the time. As a matter of fact, quite often you'll see a video of Soviet MiGs literally buzzing our ships, flying very close to them. And in the past, when we've had guys from the Navy, like the guys from the Nimitz case, which is, I'm sure, the reason why this got your attention, when we had Kevin Day, Gary Voorhees, Jason Turner, and PJ Hughes on the show. That was one of the things I asked. And Gary said, yeah, this kind of thing happens all the time. In fact, these MiGs get very close to our ships, and the reason why it's not such an issue is that we can actually detect whether or not their weapon systems are locking on to our ships. So they know that they're just buzzing through, that there's a bit of a, just kind of a game playing and brinkmanship going on. And also when we had Paco Chirici on, I asked him about this too. And he said, yeah, this kind of thing goes on all the time. We do it to them, they do it to us. And it's, again, just sort of part of the game. And the key is, again, we have the kind of technology that will read whether or not there's some kind of a weapon system that is locked, that's got a target lock, that's getting ready to fire on us. So if it's surveillance, they may or may not try to knock it out of the sky. It doesn't seem likely. As Steve mentioned, they're over international waters, so they're probably not going to do that. I would be very surprised if we didn't know that they had those drones up in the air. It's impossible to tell from the photograph just how close this drone was to the Nimitz and the other ships in the battle group, but it could have been miles away, depending on the quality of the camera. Regardless, I think it's quite likely that we would have picked it up.
Okay, so I have a naive question to ask because I'm not a military expert of all of our guests, and that is this. Is it possible for intelligence-related drones to fly in tandem with a bomb and actually drop it on anything, anywhere? I ask because if it actually is true, and it looks like it is due to these pictures here that were produced from the air over the USS Nimitz war carrier, exposing two of our fighter jets sitting there on the deck, which I'm sure is not unusual for the USS Nimitz to have. However, my question is, since there was a series of drones that were flying over it, that's something my understanding is that the U.S. Government would never want to have, and that is have anything fly over anything of ours. So my question to you all is there any kind of device of war that could be attached to drones and dropped?
Who are you asking?
Well,
yeah,
sorry to interject. I forgot to also ask, in addition to that, could those drones have killed anyone? And I'd like to start with Tom. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for example, General Soleimani was killed by a Predator drone with a Hellfire missile. Now, the thing that we don't know is we don't know what the drone looked like that took this picture over the Nimitz. We don't know if it's one of these cheapy kind of drones that we see people running in the park, or if it's actually an airplane configuration type of a drone. But I'll tell you this, the trend is, at least on the U.S. side and probably in other countries, is to develop more and more capability through unmanned aerial vehicles, because they don't have to put pilots at risk. And in principle, these unmanned aerial vehicles should be less expensive to develop and produce than these extremely expensive fighter jets.
Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, let me clarify a little bit. I said something about the captain might be embarrassed. Look, we have cameras that can film a license plate from space. And so I would be more inclined to think this. There were drones in the area. They were at a substantial distance from the craft. They did not fly directly over the Nimitz, and as a result did not pose a threat. What's happened here is that they took some photos and they published them. as you know, in the article, it says clearly that they have done this before. They have published photos of our ships in the Gulf. So really, there's nothing really significant has happened here. Now, can a drone carry a bomb? Could the drone be a threat? Oh, absolutely. And I would suggest that if that drone had got in close to that carrier, they would have shot it down. This is a very mild kind of thing. Why they put the photograph out at this particular time, who knows? But it's not something that I find concerning. I mean, overall, our relationship with Iran and how we're dealing with them is concerning. But in terms of the context, the past, and so forth, that I don't think it's that big a deal.
Frank, do you think?
And Chan, I would like to say one other.
Go ahead, please.
I'd like to say one other thing about that is I don't think Iran is stupid enough to try to fire on a major U.S. warship. That would be an overt act of war. Okay. And rather, I've stated, and maybe Steve doesn't agree, but I see this as an undeclared low-intensity war that's going on. I think a whole lot more is going on behind the scenes than we ever hear about.
Okay, thank you.
And just to jump in really quick, I want to make a point. The New York Times and also the War Zone over at drive.com published a number of FOIA'd out reports from the Navy and the Air Force. This was not the most recent New York Times story, but the one a little bit earlier this year, where a lot of those cases were identified as drones, and some of it was right off our own coast. So this is the kind of thing that they deal with pretty frequently, and I think is part of the interest in the UAP phenomenon. Although they're identified as drones, a lot of these, they don't know who the owner is, especially off the coast. I mean, it could be something as simple as somebody out to sea, and they've got a drone on board, and they just want to fly the drone, and they're encountering our own military off our own coast. It could be, I wouldn't put it past some countries to, their intelligence services having people hire boats out and taking the drones up and going out and getting a closer look at our own military engaged in maneuvers and activities off our own coast. I mean, that's certainly a possibility too. But when you saw the volume of the reports, there were quite a few of them, that this is actually a kind of a common thing. I mean, obviously, we're over there in the Straits of Hormuz. We're in the Iranian backyard, but there's a lot of this sort of thing that goes on in our own backyard when our own ships are, just right off our own coast. So this kind of thing happens quite a bit, and I think this is a part of the concern that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence is asking about these various and sundry UAP incidents. Some of them, of course, they're not extraterrestrial. The flight characteristics aren't otherworldly. They almost certainly know that some of these instances are in fact drones, but nevertheless, it's part of the issue and part of the problem for the military.
Okay, thank you. I guess the last question I had to ask you, Frank, was: do you feel like sort of a pretend or pseudo defense maneuver just to show the U.S. that they being Iran, can actually take a picture of anything they want anytime? And it was just sort of boasting rights when they handed it over to an Iran-related
I would say that that was what it was. Just letting the world know that they're there, that they're keeping an eye on things from their own perspective, and that. They've almost certainly been doing it all along, and my guess is that we know that they've been doing it all along. And finally, for whatever reason, they decided to go public with something.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And Chan, you had some quotes about this. You were able to pick up a few quotes from some people who have not been able to join us. So.
Yeah. I actually given them to you for in a screenshot.
I've got the graphics. So if you want to go ahead and read through them, and I've got them lined up.
Okay. Sure. Let me just go ahead and bring those up. I'm sorry, I was not aware. Let me see if I can find those real quick. It'll just take me a moment.
Okay.
Sorry about the wait on that. Okay, so I do have a quote from Jeff Kraus, State Director of MUFON SoCal. He said anytime that one of our ships is flown over by any unauthorized aircraft, it is a security concern. Of course, these days, to get a good photo with a drone, you don't need to be right on top of your subject, which is also a security concern to some degree. In this case with Iran, the drone was close enough to interfere with aircraft in the area, which can be hazardous as well. You don't need to have bombs or missiles to be a danger, because if you fly into one of the aircraft, whether on accident or purpose, it could be fatal to the pilots involved and could be the impetus of other future military engagements. Moving along, we did get a quote from Earl Gray. And Earl Gray is the Assistant State Director of Southern California, Chief Field Investigator and Star Team at MUFON. And he said when the Tic Tac incident happened, the Navy took for granted that their radar systems had been malfunctioning. It took them a week to send out a squadron of planes to investigate. When they finally sent planes in to investigate, they found out that the radar hadn't been malfunctioning. You'd hope that they would have noticed an incoming drone before it could actually overfly the USS Nimitz. Did they ignore the radar images again this time? One has to hope that the COs would have learned their lessons since 2004, but apparently not. The last quote we have is from Shane Hurd, and Shane Hurd is the Assistant Director of AZ MUFON and author of UAP, A Beginner's Guide to Researching UFOs. Sure. He said, "It has become clear in the last few years unmanned aerial vehicles technology has become ubiquitous in the private commercial and military landscape. It is no surprise countries such as Iran are deploying these intelligence, offensive, and defensive capable assets across the globe. In fact, UAV technology poses a huge threat, such as swarm attacks on military assets such as the USS Nimitz and other naval vessels. Many will recall an interesting coincidence that the so-called Tic Tac UAP counter occurred with the USS Nimitz in 2004. However, that was 16 years ago when this technology was relatively novel. Moreover, no known UAV today displays the performance characteristics demonstrated by the Tic Tac. UAV technology is amazing and no doubt getting more sophisticated by the moment, but we are a very long way from engineering that kind of performance technology. I'm sure military science is well aware and working hard to replicate some of the Tic Tac's capabilities, but we all should be aware of world events and developments around us so we can make an educated judgment of the meaning and import of events such as this." End of quote.
And I want to get, since he mentioned the advanced characteristics, and we didn't see any evidence of that in the earlier reports from the Times earlier this year, or in this particular instance, but the War Zone this past week has written an article about how we're looking to develop aircraft with these hypersonic speeds. And as far as I can tell, none of these craft with hypersonic speeds are going to be manned. So I just want to read a little snippet from this. Regarding laser technology and reducing drag and increasing the speeds on some of these vehicles. By combining advanced directed energy technology with the latest in hypersonic vehicle design, researchers in private and Department of Defense funded labs have laid the groundwork for systems designed to literally sheath an entire vehicle in laser and or microwave induced plasma in order to drastically reduce drag. If successfully developed, this concept may someday lead to new frontiers in speed and radical new forms of aerodynamic control and aircraft design. Now we're kind of making the connection over to the UFOs, and Steve and Tom, there's always been talk about reverse engineering or trying to figure out how some of these advanced ET crafts operate. What do you think about this kind of technology as a possibility in terms of bringing some of these vehicles that we manufacture, that we fly, and able to get them and control them and get them at speeds, according to this article, possibly reaching Mach 20, which you're talking about 15,000 miles an hour. That is awfully fast.
Well,
Steve,
I will say that I think that one speculation about how some of these UFOs may operate is they seem to be in some kind of plasma bubble, and it makes friction and interaction with the air, with the atmosphere, it makes that irrelevant. And Luis Elizondo has commented that these craft can be in space, they can be in the atmosphere, and they can go underwater. And if they're in some kind of a plasma bubble, that enables that kind of capability. It sounds like a radical improvement in technology, but who knows? You know, we're always hearing that they're 20, 30 years ahead of what we hear about. So maybe they're getting there.
Radical, but also potentially dangerous when you've got an adversary who's looking to get inside your airspace, and they can do it literally within an hour.
Well, and I'm a little surprised about some of the focus on so-called hypersonic vehicles. I mean, these missiles that have been developed for so many years, you know, these Minuteman and other missiles that we fire toward the Soviet Union or vice versa, they're by definition hypersonic. That's how you get from the U.S. to the Soviet Union or the other way, you know, virtually in a matter of minutes.
Steve, any thoughts on that?
I do not think that we have any technology which has been publicly mentioned, in other words, that's in the public arena, that even remotely approaches the capabilities of the craft seen in the Tic Tac for video. If we have technology at that level, then it is completely classified and secret. There's nothing out on it. So it is possible that what was seen by the Nimitz, by the aircraft off the Nimitz, was in fact highly classified U.S. technology, 80 of them flying in formations and also near our carrier group, which would be just about the stupidest thing anybody even remotely connected to the United States military would even think of doing. So we can't rule it out. But, and we do know that we have developed anti-gravitic craft. I believe we have. Do we have anti-gravitic craft capable of doing what those craft did, which is quite extreme? You can have anti-gravity and be able to fly something. It doesn't mean you can shoot straight up, virtually instantaneous, massive acceleration and speeds and stop on a dime. But it's possible. I just think it's highly unlikely. And I'll keep in mind that the craft seen by the Nimitz planes is in the context of 70 years of evidence amassing that there's an extraterrestrial presence. And so if you have to pick between ET craft and human craft on that, in that case, you have to put your money on ET craft. The odds are highly in your favor.
Now, you don't think the odds are a little bit worse now as we're approaching modern times? It's one thing to say, yeah, a UFO flying at 7,000 miles an hour back in the early 1950s, well, you know, that definitely isn't one of ours. Now we're getting more towards modern times, that those odds are shifting a little bit. It's a little bit more ambiguous.
Well, again, we're trying to advance our technology. We're trying to get faster, and I get that. So obviously, we're going to get faster. These entities have been doing this for 70 years, and that was 14 years ago, 2004. And there were many of them, a large number of them, which then disappeared near the island of Guadalupe, which now implies that the U.S. has built undersea bases for their anti-gravity craft, which they're flying around carelessly. No, look, as we get closer to disclosure, which is coming soon, there's going to be a whole lot of twisting and elaborate efforts to somehow explain what we're seeing by more mundane and earthly theories. I get it, but hey, fact is, it's probably almost certainly extraterrestrial, and that's what's important. Not whether we're going to have a craft like that in 50 years. What's important is there's ETs here now. They've been here for some time, and they're doing things like flying 80 of their high-tech either drones or piloted craft near our carrier groups on several occasions. That's what's important. That's what we need to focus on, and that's where my work is.
I did actually talk to a well-known person in the UFO community. It was I cannot say their name, but they actually have credentials that are PhD level. And they told me that regarding what faced the sailors and naval aviators regarding the USS Nimitz and USS Princeton, he believes was a DARPA-related project. And that was his thought process on it. He also said that he believed that it's possible that DARPA was, in a sense, pulling kind of a stunt, as amazing as that sounds, by actually having the high technology that DARPA may have engineered to zoom past everybody in the form of an exercise. However, that it was not something that they were all privy to, they being the military personnel that witnessed it. And so anyway, that was his thought process on that. And he doesn't want his name known for obvious reasons regarding that topic. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting perspective.
So let's move along. And within the last week or so, President Trump signed the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and Appropriations bill into law. Part of that bill includes a request or demand from the Senate for a report on the UAP phenomenon from the Pentagon Task Force on the subject. And haven't talked to either of you, Tom or Steve, in a while about that, and was wondering just what your thoughts on that are. It looks like it's got to be delivered within 180 days, and wanted to get your feedback on what you think might be in there.
I'll start. I take a wait and see attitude, because there are several things that can mitigate the strict 180-day deadline. For one thing, if they're not complete the report as they would like, they may apply for an extension. And it's only fair that if they have not been able to organize or prepare the report in proper fashion, that they would apply for an extension. And it seems to me that reasonable people in the Senate would grant that. Also, I don't think that we should be on the edge of our chairs, biting our fingernails at exactly 180 days after the initiation date. Because, for one thing, they could disclose very little interesting information, and that most of it could remain classified. Now, I hope, and I sincerely hope, that we get some interesting information from the report. But if we look at history, I think it's unlikely that we're going to get anything earth-shattering from the report. But I take a wait-and-see attitude. I'm hopeful, but I'm also careful in my expectations.
Steve, your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. Let me begin with this. Frank, my understanding is that the president has not signed the Defense Intelligence and Appropriations Bill.
Okay.
I have done a search. I don't see it. And if it happened, I would almost certainly know it. So you may want to check your source on that.
Okay. Congress.gov. I'll get it to you. It became law.
Yeah, send me a link if you've got a link. That would be very important to know.
Okay.
But the fact that it's not showing up on Google in any way. But whatever. Okay. But let's get to the real point. In terms of almost any question now I'm asked about ongoing events and things that are happening ET related, every one of them I view through the same context. So I need to give you this context so you can understand what I'm trying to convey. The context is fairly straightforward. And this is going to be the focus of my podcast going forward. It's going to focus on this, not exclusively, but intensely. One, I am quite convinced we're in the last months of the truth embargo. Two, barring some significant event that would shove it to the side. Now, by significant, the U.S. and China start sinking each other's ships in the South China Sea. A meteor a mile wide hits the Atlantic Ocean. That would push it to the side. But barring something of that magnitude, I believe we're going to have hearings starting next year in February. And once those hearings get underway, disclosure is inevitable and probably soon. So with that in mind, and plus what has happened over the last 3 years in general, I view these events in that context. Let's talk about the what's the one we're on now? It's the issue the Defense Intelligence Appropriations Bill. Okay. Here's what happened. There were many meetings on the Hill provided to committee chairs, orchestrated by Christopher Mellon, the political operative of the TTSA. Two people that got those hearings, and by many, I mean scores of them, were the chairman of the House Senate Intelligence Committee, Marco Rubio, and of course the ranking member, Mark Warner. Mark Warner actually acknowledged he had gotten a briefing some time ago, though he did not elaborate. And in general, all of these briefings were off the record, meaning you weren't supposed to give interviews about them, you weren't supposed to do anything. Mark Walker was a congressman that did do something. And I think eventually that stopped pretty quickly. I think he was kind of told, Mark, don't do that. But that's it. The only one that really took any measures based upon these briefings, which I'm sure were quite interesting. So you have a situation where both Republicans and Democrats are being briefed. They could not simply brief Democrats, even though that's where they started out. And so you have Republican committee chairs getting briefed by these pilots, and one or more of those chairs went to the White House and said, we're getting these briefings. As a result, there was a briefing given to the president. And there's articles about this online. So the president got briefed. Now, he hasn't done anything about it. And so we move forward. So put yourself in the shoes of Mark Rubio. One, the Republicans have virtually nothing on this issue. They have said nothing, done nothing until very recently. On this issue, they're way behind the curve. The Democrats are far ahead, right? And this is a major thing. We're talking about, from my perspective, we're heading towards the most profound event in human history. And Rubio doesn't want to be left in the cold on that. He doesn't want to be behind the curve. He wants to be out in front. He's a very transactional guy, very good survivalist, and he takes care of himself. He does what he has to do. And so Rubio is looking at this briefing and he's saying, what can I do? And he came up with a brilliant stroke. And I would love to be able to interview the both of them, which will never happen, and ask them, did Mark Warner initiate this idea of putting this language in the appropriations bill, or you? Was it both of you? And so forth. Don't know. But I know that Rubio had to sign off on it because he's the chairman of the committee. And so without Rubio's consent, it doesn't get in that bill. So I'm going to put it on Rubio. And so what's going on here? Well, first of all, Rubio is not up for election. He's not up for election this year. So he's got no risk there. All right? Fine. So he puts this language in, and it's really very clever.
Just to jump in, real quick, Steve, Warner is up for re-election, but he's leading significantly in the polls. He's in good shape.
Yeah, Warner's he's up for re-election, but and he doesn't have a problem. Rubio could very well have a problem this year, as many Republican senators are finding out. But he's not up for election. There's no risk there. And then he puts this language in, and it's very cleverly done. It says that we need to get certain information from certain agencies, including the ONI, 6 months from the signing of the bill. I don't think the bill has been signed yet, frankly. If I'm right, then that 6 months is enough.
It says on Congress.gov it became law. I sent you the link in the chat here.
The Defense Appropriations Bill became law?
That it was the Senate Select Committee bill became law. S311. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not correct. That is a different. That's a different bill. But hang on a sec here.
That's kind of what I thought, Frank. There are a number of bills that get passed in appropriations.
Right.
And I think
the S3905 Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021 became law.
Okay, that should be the bill. That should be where the language is. And this would have been very recent.
It is. I pulled the wrong link up on the website, but the graphic is correct. Hang on a sec. Let me find it. I'll get you the link. You can see it for yourself.
So I'm assuming it was signed this month. So you got October, November, December.
Just within the last 10 days or so.
Okay. So the deadline is early March, well, wait a minute, actually it could be middle to late March.
Yeah.
Which is after the election. The hearings will have already started at that point. So what Rubio has done is he has inserted himself into the situation, into the issue in a very solid way. So if things develop as I believe they will develop, he's looking really good. He's done his part. He's helped. He's come forward. He's done something, which, by the way, got a lot of press. So this was a very positive thing for Marco Rubio to do. Marco Rubio to do was done carefully with minimal risk to him. That's what happened there. All right. And again, you can see if one is not working from my context, if they don't think disclosure is anywhere near close, if they don't think hearings are going to be happening next year early, then they would have a different take on it. But I feel pretty good about my take on this.
Well, a further complicating factor is, of course, we do have a presidential election in November. And it's not the polls aren't looking too good for Trump right at the moment. So he would be out of office January 20th, I believe, 21st, whenever Inauguration Day is. So that would be before this window deadline of 180 days. So a further complicating factor is, at least in my view, that both the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, and the Undersecretary of Defense, who is overseeing the UAP task force, David Norquist, have expressed publicly quite a bit of interest in the subject of at least hypersonics and any kind of technology gap between us and any potential rivals, obviously Russia and China we're talking about here. And this is something that is of interest to them. Now, the deadline is 180 days, but if these guys know they're going to be out of office within that time frame, do you think it's at least possible that they'll say, well, look, we want our stamp on something regarding this particular issue before we lose our jobs, before we have to go back into the private sector, and we want to get this out here sooner? Do you think that is at least possible should Trump lose the election?
Anything is possible, but my answer is no. The entities, the agencies like ONI, they're not going to deliver anything ahead of time. More importantly, this is not what's at play now. In other words, I don't know what we're going to get 180 days from now, but it's almost not even relevant. In other words, what is going on now is posturing and positioning as people are trying to react to it seems to be an inevitable process underway that is essentially set up by the TTSA, has been put in place over the last 3 years, and it's now reaching its culmination. And so it's all about the congressional hearings to come and disclosure. It's not about whether we get anything from the ONI. The ONI just got set up, right? And that was a maneuver, a posturing maneuver, right? Why did they set it up? Because they needed to get on the table. They needed to get on board. They needed to do something. The Navy has been doing a number of things to try to position themselves on this issue, right? In other words, things are not on their face what they are. You have to look at the agenda behind it and what is going on. Now, in terms of the hearings, which I believe will start in February, there is a significant, there's 4 outcomes that could very well alter this to some degree.
Okay, Steve, let me jump in here real quick before you get into that. Who is going to host the hearings? Is it going to be is it going to be the military committee? Is it going to be the intelligence committee? Who's going to do that?
Mellon has been setting up the hearings for almost a year and a half. They will be multiple committees. There may be one that starts it, but there will be many committees. The Armed Services Committees, House, Senate, Intelligence Committees, House, Senate, and others. Any one of these can be the first to start, or they could start multiple hearings. It doesn't really matter. Once they get going,
Steve,
over.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
By law, are these hearings going to be open, or could they just be classified and we never hear anything?
Well, the whole point of this, what the TTSA is doing, is to get public hearings, not to get private hearings. That doesn't mean that some of the witnesses will not do some testimony, a closed testimony, for intelligence reasons, security reasons. But what's really important is the public hearings that are going to take place that are going to be watched by probably more people than have ever watched hearings before. All right. And but in order to have hearings, you have to have witnesses. And the preference would be military witnesses. So guess what the TTSA has been doing? primarily using the unidentified programs on history. They have been gathering scores of military witnesses that testify at these hearings for months. They have plenty of them.
That was essentially season 2. They gathered a lot of witnesses.
Well, they did in season 1. They were bringing forth witnesses, and as that show went forward, as there was no significant pushback by the Department of Defense, guess what? The bar started coming down for other military personnel to come forward, and they started coming forward. In some off the cuff remark, I think Tom DeLonge mentioned they had 1,500 contacts. Now, in the second series, season, 8 episodes, they brought out a number of new witnesses we hadn't seen. Some of them were in silhouette. All right, fine. So what they're showing you is, yeah, we've got witnesses. They're coming to us, right? They don't come to me. They don't come to Greer. But, maybe in the old days they did, but they're going to the TTSA. The bar has been dropped. The witnesses are coming forward. It's going to become a flood eventually. So they have all the witnesses they need to stock any number of hearings come February. And without exception, I assume they will all be military witnesses. But something really significant happened in the 8th episode, the final episode of Unidentified, a few weeks back. And by the way, there's not going to be another Unidentified season this year, right? I don't know if there ever will be another one because things are going to blow out early in the year, but that they're done. In fact, they've made it clear they're moving off to other things. They're going international. Tom's doing his music. They're going to pretty much stand back for the rest of this year for obvious reasons. All right. But it will be military witnesses, pilots. That's what the Senate and the House committees want to hear. They don't want to hear civilian witnesses. They want the military guys up there because they'll be the most powerful witnesses. Okay. Now, I lost my train of thought a little bit. Because you asked me something. Wait a minute. Yeah. Oh, damn it.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. I'll think of it.
You say that we're in the last months of the so-called truth embargo.
Yes.
What is your definition or description of the end of the truth embargo?
Well, the last months of the truth embargo mean that we're heading towards disclosure. The end of the truth embargo was the disclosure event. That's the only thing that really ends it. It's not some pilots coming forward or so forth. Until the President of the United States walks into the East Room and confirms publicly to us that there is, in fact, an extraterrestrial presence, both now and likely in the past, the truth embargo remains. The whole purpose of the truth embargo is to prevent that from happening. And those managing the truth embargo have always known that any hearings in the modern era, going back, say, 20 years, would end the embargo. And so every effort to get congressional hearings have been blocked cold. I know of at least 3 or 4. There have been others. In other words, they could not have them because they know that once those hearings get started, it's game over. So they couldn't have that because they weren't ready to let the truth embargo end. However, what has happened in the last 3 years is that a group within the DOD has decided it's time for the embargo to end. But how do you do it? It's not easy. And you can't act unilaterally. And what they did was they created the TTSA as a non-governmental organization operating outside as a de facto representative of the DOD. They started putting information forward and gathering witnesses. They have all the right personnel. Mellon is the political guy. Elizondo is the witness guy. And they have been working for 1.5 years. Now, they wanted this to happen a lot sooner. All of this was supposed to happen bam, bam, bam back in 2016, 2017. And when the election went the other way, they ended up having to draw this out until the next election. However, with respect to their plan, there are 4 outcomes here. The most likely, there are a couple of very unlikely outcomes, but there are 4 fundamental outcomes, and each one will affect this scenario in a different way. They are Trump wins, the GOP wins the Senate, or the GOP loses the Senate. Biden wins, the GOP wins the Senate, the GOP loses the Senate. Every one of these is a different outcome, creating a different situation. The worst case scenario in terms of this plan going forward, as I believe it is planned to be, would be Trump wins and the GOP hold the Senate. That's going to create a very tough, heavily bipartisan, tense situation, and it may be difficult to get the committee chairs to step forward for these hearings under that scenario. The other 3 scenarios are much more conducive.
I would just like to comment that I agree with you, Steve, that there is a faction within DoD that wants disclosure. But my understanding, and those of us in the UFO field have known for quite a while, or we believe for quite a while, that there is also a faction that does not want disclosure.
True. But they're not winning. If they had the power to stop this process, they would have done so by now. This has been going on for, as of October, 3 years. Generated nearly 700 mainstream print articles, all of which about TTSA-related stuff, Nimitz, you name it. 700 articles, and they are on my website right now. You can go read them all. They have created mass awareness of this issue, generated all kinds of events, activities by the Navy, by the Army, and of course now you have things like Rubio taking measures. And so if they are really wanting this process to stop, they have failed miserably. I believe they have reconciled themselves to the fact that it's likely to happen, barring some certain political developments.
I wanted to bring to the listeners' attention Steve Bassett's website, which is www.paradigmresearchgroup.org, so that you can go ahead and be privy to the kinds of topics that he covered. A few of them tonight. I had a question for Tom.
Yep. And sign up for the newsletter too. You've got a newsletter, Steve. That's fantastic.
Yes. It's very pertinent and very relevant. Wanted to ask Tom a question, and that is, do you believe that the Trump administration has been as progressive or busy as possible, so to speak, regarding trying to disclose or help in the disclosure of the UFO topic, or anything UFO related? If you want to share anything on that topic regarding Trump and UFOs, that would be nice. And then also wanted to ask you if the Trump administration could have done a better job, or do you think they're doing a great job in that area?
It's interesting because I think it's with Trump, it's been mixed. He has been asked about the issue, and he's, I think in one response, seemed to be indifferent. Not too long ago, he was interviewed by his son, and they mentioned Roswell, which was interesting. And I think it depends on the president. For example, and I will say in general, Republican presidents seem to be less inclined to favor disclosure. They're very national security oriented. But it's interesting that during the Reagan years, everything that I've come across is that President Reagan was very interested in the UFO topic, and that he possibly was very personally interested in disclosing more to the public. And it's a question of how to do it. Now, Steve has brilliantly pointed out that the TTSE people were probably working with Hillary Clinton campaign, and we have John Podesta, who's extremely interested in the subject, and they arranged to have Hillary Clinton asked about the UFO problem, and she had responded, and that probably if Hillary Clinton had been elected and she had promised that she would release everything that she could without violating the interests of the United States about UFOs. So I think my answer, what I'm trying to say is I think Trump is less inclined to disclose, but we never know. We really don't know.
Okay, thank you very much for that input. And Frank, did you want to move on to the next topic?
Well, yeah, just one last thing regarding Trump. I don't see him as being a logjam against this. Again, reading the public comments of Esper and Norquist. And by the way, David Norquist also heads up the Special Access Program Committee in the Defense Department. That's another one of his duties that I think is important to bring out. I don't see them necessarily as logjams to this. I don't see anything where they're trying to stonewall or anything along those lines. In fact, more information about UAPs seems right in line with the type of things that they're talking about and that they want for the Defense Department, making sure that there's no sort of technology gap between us and any foreign adversaries, an intense interest in hypersonics. Those kind of things, they're on the record publicly about these type of things. things where UAPs aren't getting mentioned. But based on that, there's no reason to think that they're stonewalling here. I don't think that they are.
Great. Thank you very much. Wanted to know if we can move on to the topic of Japan and UFOs. I wanted to make a statement regarding that.
Let's move over to that real quick. And let me. I've got to do. I'm ready to go on that. And just as far as the international slant on all this, the only country that we're really seeing a lot of interest in on this particular subject, on our favorite subject, the UFOs, has come from Japan. Back in back in April, the defense minister for Japan, Kono, had said that they are very interested in this UFO subject. This was around the time that the UFO videos from the Nimitz and the Roosevelt cases were formally released by the Navy. And he said, hey, next time we get the chance, we are going to bring this up. And in point of fact, Kono and Defense Secretary Mark Esper met in August, and in fact it was brought up during their meeting by Kono, and then after that was at the very end of August, and then very early part of this month, the Japanese military is now officially tracking UFOs. Japan's defense minister Taro Kono issued the instructions this week. According to NHK, the self-defense forces will make reports if anyone spots an unidentifiable object in the air that could affect the country's defense and security. The guidelines also urge all-out efforts to take photos and videos of the object to carry out the necessary analysis. We have not seen anything, to the best of my knowledge, from any of our allies regarding this subject, except from Japan. And Tom and Steve, what are your thoughts on all that? Why is everybody else so quiet, except the Japanese?
Pick somebody, Frank.
Steve.
Again, remember the context that I'm coming from. All right. Japan is well aware that we're in the last days of possibly in the last days of the truth embargo. So is Russia. So is China. So is any other country that matters. They're well aware of this. They've been following very closely everything that's been happening in the U.S. regarding the TTSA. All of the stuff. They all know it. Point number two. Japan has been tracking UFOs for not 70 years. Ever since they finally got themselves together after World War II and had defense planes. I forget when we allowed that, but let's just say 1960, okay? They've been tracking UFOs all that time. Of course they have. So what's different now? Why are they announcing something that they've been doing for a long time? Because, just like Marco Rubio and others, they want to get on board the train before the train gets to the station. And so by doing this, just like the Navy's announcements about they're altering their protocols for reporting, and then they confirm that the gun camera footage was real, all that stuff is positioning. It's like, get out in front of this issue. So when it finally breaks, you don't look like you were sitting on what you knew and acting dumb for all these decades. It doesn't mean it's going to solve all their public relations problems. No. But it's better than doing nothing. And so Japan has made a move. I would expect a couple more moves by some countries and in the U.S. over the coming months. And watch for them, because they're going to happen.
I agree with you. I just wanted to interject here and state that if anybody really believes that Japan just started officially investigating UFOs or UAPs, whatever term you prefer, they have to be the most naive person on the planet. I'll tell you why. It's within the best interest, naturally, for any first, second, or third world country on the planet to make sure that they know exactly what is in the skies. And they do that for defense reasons. Yeah. So for anyone to imagine that Japan or any country has actually just started officially trying to detect something that is not easily identifiable, that's just not even possible. Now, I wanted to point out before we asked Tom the same question that Frank asked Steve, is that there's a list of investigations of UFOs by governments. And there's Brazil, Canada, France, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, of course, United States. So it's not like Japan is the first country to officially state this.
Sure.
Maybe they are, but if we wanted to be kind of technical about it, there's already been investigations of UFOs by governments worldwide. Who better to know about this? Actually, there's one organization on the planet that does, and they've been around for half a century, and they're an institution, and that is MUFON. And so, Tom, can you please touch on this topic?
I have a somewhat different.
Tom, we lost your audio. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
yeah. Yeah, you dropped.
I have a
you're good now.
somewhat different take. Yeah, I have a somewhat different take on this. I think it's in both the U.S. Well, it's mainly in the U.S. to know everything that's going on in the Pacific sphere, and the Chinese Navy is getting more active. The Chinese are becoming more aggressive in their sphere of influence in the South China Sea. There's longstanding discomfort between Japan and Korea and China. So I think that this kind of an agreement or this kind of understanding serves for the Japanese reporting everything that they're finding in the air to the United States. So in that way, the United States has a more complete understanding of everything that's going on in the Pacific, particularly in the Western Pacific. And that's my interpretation of it. Secondly, yes, we are an international organization, but it's tough to be worldwide, literally. And we do have representatives in foreign countries. We have good relations with France and with Western Europe. Japan, I don't want to say too much because I don't feel like I'm qualified to really expound on that. But we do make attempts to have international and even worldwide connections.
Chant, do I understand that you have a page or know of a page that has a complete list of investigations by the countries? Could you please send that to me?
I will. And actually, I'll just go ahead and share with our listeners where that is. You can actually find the list of investigations of UFOs by governments. That is listed on Wikipedia. If you actually just type in Google, list of investigations of UFOs by governments, or you can type in countries, UFOs, Wikipedia. Okay. But I will send that link to you. And also, I wanted to bring up some interesting news about Japan regarding the UFO topic. And this is a little bit of an older article, but it was published by the Associated Press on December 18th of 2007. And the title of the article is UFOs Definitely Exist, Japanese Government Spokesman Says. And just an excerpt from it, Japan's Air Force has never spotted a UFO, but the country's top government spokesman said Tuesday he definitely believes they exist. Chief Cabinet Secretary Nobutaka Machimura was speaking to reporters in response to demands lodged by an opposition lawmaker for an inquiry into frequent reports of UFO sightings. And the government said in an official reply that it had not confirmed sightings of unidentified flying objects believed to be from outer space. Still, I definitely believe they exist. The country's top government spokesman of Japan said, which to that meeting erupted in laughter. Now, wanted to know from both yourselves, and I'll ask Tom to start. Do you feel like any nation feels too uncomfortable to ever come forward and just state, yes, we do believe it's possible that some of these crafts are possibly controlled by something that is not human? Do you think that will ever happen?
Well, I think it has happened. I believe that Brazil, at least in certain respects, has been somewhat more forthcoming. Some of the European countries have been somewhat more forthcoming, for example, Spain and particularly France. I think the United States has the lead, and certain countries that are affiliated with the United States, such as Britain, Australia, and such, I think that they take the lead from the U.S., and I think that they would be more reluctant to come out with a position like that.
Okay. And I think I did hear Christopher Mellon, who is on the board of the TTSA, actually, and he was a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, by the way. But I think I did hear him on a YouTube state that he did believe that they were ET related. He said they're here and they're here now. However, folks can go ahead and double check on that. I'm pretty sure I did hear him say something to that effect. How do you feel about the topic of UFOs turning into the topic of nations actually saying we believe that they could be commandeered by something that's ET related and not human in form? Steve, is that possible?
Look, the truth embargo, like all embargoes, has certain rules. Like the embargo of Cuba, there's a whole bunch of rules associated with that, right, that you can do, can't do, and so forth. Same thing with the truth embargo, only it's obviously a lot more complicated. And so if you look at the history of what nations have done, you can kind of see how they're following a script. They're staying within the lines. They're not going too far. Classic example, when Japan made that statement back a number of years that you were quoting, where they said that they think that there may be something going on, right? They had to insert, we've never seen one, right? We've never seen one. Now, that's, of course, an outright lie. They've seen them, they've radared them and so forth, but they had to say that. Otherwise, it would create a little too much. So why are all these nations staying within the lines? Why did they follow the fundamental rules of the truth embargo with the occasional misstep? Because the best answer I can give is this. The disclosure event will be the most important event in human history, totally global, implications beyond our computations, all right? Massive, affecting everything. And so, obviously, it's a big deal. And we have certain countries in the world which are the big dogs on the porch. China, United States, Russia because of its nukes, India because of its population, the UK probably because of its military power. And they're all going to be affected by this. But number one has always been the United States. Up until recently, we were still the big dog on the porch. We're increasingly shrinking in size. But the point is that it's clear that all of these nations, for their own reasons, decided that they were not going to upset this process. They were not going to violate the truth embargo, which would be to do something that would literally end it, right? Either by announcing it through their head of state or by doing something that literally forced the issue out. No way you could stop it. But they haven't. And I believe it's because the United States is extremely important to all of these countries. First of all, throughout the Cold War, we were their primary defense against annihilation. Who could defeat the Soviet Union but the United States? And so do you want to anger the United States? Do you want to violate an absolute important, extremely high priority policy? No, you're not. Soviet Union and Communist China had their own reasons, primarily because of the nature of the countries, extreme authoritarian control states. They don't want to introduce ETs into that little game. And so that's how the truth embargo has moved forward. But there is a history of these nations doing things, saying things, which are helpful and have helped advance the understanding. But let me get back to something you said earlier. I'd be a little more generous with the general public. It's not so much naivete. For those of us that really know this issue and have followed this issue and maybe have some political savvy, yeah, it's pretty obvious. But for the average person out there, just living their life, trying to raise a family, if the government says something or Japan says something, they just accept it. I mean, why shouldn't they? And so they're not naive. They just don't have the amount of information. And one of the principal tasks of the disclosure movement, truth movement, was to expand the awareness of people and journalists worldwide about what the hell is really going on, so more and more people would not be naive. They would actually have a sense of this and make it harder for the truth embargo to continue.
Thank you for bringing that up.
And I'd like to add to what Steve said. Regular folks just don't have the time to dig in. and dig all this stuff up. That in this day and age, you got to go out, you got to hustle up that income to keep yourself going, and the time it takes to do that. There's not a lot of time left. Another point I'd like to make, Steve, you had talked about the Unidentified show, and it was a very interesting phenomenon regarding the ratings. I don't know if you kept an eye on that, but the first three shows, two of the first three ended up in the top 10 for cable show ratings. And then what happened? They fell off the tabletop, and that falling off the tabletop directly coincided with NBA and NHL playoffs coming back online, which they couldn't possibly have anticipated. They nosedived, they tanked when the playoffs came around. So I just wanted to throw that out there and mention that. I mean, let's face it, this is not a priority for most people. They might be casual, even people who are inclined to be casually interested. It's still not a priority.
Absolutely,
it's also worth mentioning that, again, that show is not about getting ratings. Okay, that show is not about winning a Grammy or something. That show was part of their strategy, taking us where we got to go. And so the strategy was not to lay down bombshells like in that first season, boom, 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 and the next one is like, wow. It wasn't set up like the Curse of Oak Island. It was designed to move forward in a certain way. And people realized, well, there's no immediate payoff. Let's watch some football. That's okay. By the way, I just remembered the thing that I blanked out on. So important. Okay. You must watch. If you didn't get it the first time, you must watch The Last Identified, season 2, episode 8, because something extraordinary happened in that show. All right, and in fact, I can even read you the quote. I can pull it up.
Sure, go ahead.
But most importantly, the most extraordinary thing was this: they did something I couldn't believe they did. They went into contact. They moved into the contact phenomena in that show. That show was devoted to military personnel who had, how would you say, encounters, missing time. Now I'm going, whoa, they actually did that. Now that shows how serious they are. It shows that they are not going to simply totally keep it narrow indefinitely. Are military witnesses who've had contact going to be first and foremost in the hearings that are coming? No. But does it mean they're eventually going to show up? Yes. It was a message to the ET community, research community. It was a message to the millions of contactees in the world. Hey, we haven't forgot about you. We know it's real. Now, we couldn't interview any of the civilian versions, but the military guys a little safer for us to do that. And then, and if you'll indulge me here, at the very end of the show, we're basically wrapping up Unidentified for this year. Man, it's just going to take me a second to kind of cruise on over here. The Elizondo and Mellon they were going to wrap it up, right? Make some comments. It would sort of close things out as they go into sort of a hibernation for a while, waiting for the outcome of the election and eventually the inauguration, okay? And so these remarks were so significant that a number of people put them into text and actually created graphics. All right, and so let me hang on. Let me get them. They are down here. Got them. Okay, here we go. Oh, wait a minute. All right, I'll get this one. I'll start with this one. This was by Christopher Mellon. These are the last things he said, wrapping up the Identified second season, leading into this hiatus. The phenomena is real. These are not Russian, U.S., or Chinese vehicles. If there is another intelligence from another system which is vastly more advanced and sophisticated than we are, and we are able to establish contact and communication, it would be the equivalent of possibly gaining hundreds of thousands or millions of years of knowledge in days or weeks. Now, for people that are not following this issue intensely, this is like just some nice language, but boy, it's much more than that. Does he say, matter of fact, there's an extraterrestrial presence? No. Has he moved away from the potential threat meme? Yes. Has he put it in a context that we are much more familiar with? Yes. Has he gone right up to the line, though, and said, yeah, it's ET, but I can't quite say it? Yeah. This is very significant. This is what I was waiting for, because I was very concerned that the potential threat scenario might dominate the, let's see if I get this now. Let me put this up. Might dominate the hearings, which would be a non-trivial matter. So Elizondo then gives his closing remarks, right? Remember, Mellon's the political guy. Elizondo is the tech and the witness guy. He says, what does it mean for us if we are presented one day with the fact that there are others, capital O, out there? Does it mean we are not as special anymore? Or does it mean that we have brothers and sisters that now we should start a new journey with? I think there is a magic in that. It's wondrous to think that the greater cosmos, billions and billions of light years and billions and trillions of stars and planets that are still part of this interesting cosmic neighborhood. Wouldn't it be amazing? Maybe we will be more human. Maybe we will learn to be more than human if we have a chance to learn from something else, and therefore our definition of being human being is expanded. And so the last thing these two gentlemen probably say this year of consequence is a clear message that don't be alarmed that we are concentrating on the potential threat concern, because that's how you get the media's attention. That's how you get the committee's attention. That's how you get hearings. But behind that, these are our true sensibilities. We see this very much like you do. And we see the extraordinary possibilities that will come from this, and we're ready for it. But first, you have to get disclosure, and that goes through the hearings. And those are going to be held in front of congressional committees that have agreed to have these hearings for military witnesses to come forward and talk in a very safe political context about the potential risk of this phenomena. And in the process, the evidence will amass to the point where the president, whoever it is, can make the announcement. That's the thing I wanted to get across. Thank you for indulging me on that.
And actually, you explained that beautifully.
Thank you.
Wanted to move on to another topic. I wanted to mention the Venus topic, but before we move on to that, I failed to mention somebody who's extremely important that we all know. She's an icon in the UFO community, and she actually gave me a quote regarding the very first topic we touched on, which was the Iran related intelligence drones that actually flew over the USS Nimitz and apparently took surveillance photos of it. Her quote on that was this: "The drone surveillance is, of course, interesting because of the tensions between the U.S. and Iran. They may become more pronounced during the time before the U.S. election, but another item of interest is the involvement of the Nimitz with the UFO phenomenon. The Pentagon UFO videos are visual recordings of cockpit instrumentation displays from U.S. Navy fighter jets based aboard the Nimitz and another carrier in 2004, 2014, and 2015. The three videos are viewed as the official documenting of UFOs and the subject of extensive coverage in the media in 2017 and in 2020 were declassified by the Pentagon. Could this surveillance have taken place because of the wide publicity of this incident, or might it even relate to an interest in the UFO phenomenon?" Dr. Irene Scott, American author and physiologist, wanted to go ahead and move along to the Venus topic and ask my co-host Frank Stalter about that. Frank, you and I knew about this topic a day before it was announced. It leaked a day early, and we were onto that topic and wanted to know your thoughts on the phosphine gas on Venus. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's very interesting. Venus is not one of the top candidates regarding any kind of hunt for extraterrestrial life within our own solar system. Mars, of course, for years and years has been one of the prime candidates, and also in more recent years, the moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, Enceladus, I believe the other is Titan and Europa. There are icy moons with a known ocean underneath those ice caps, a little bit of liquid water between the ice caps and the crust of the moons. So those were the good candidates. And as it turned out, this has been theorized for a while that there might be some kind of microbial life floating around in the upper atmosphere of Venus. The reason why it would have to be there is because the surface of Venus, and I've got a picture from the surface of Venus that was taken by by a Russian lander a number of years ago is insane. The idea of life living on there, it's an awfully extreme environment. Temperatures can reach more than 800 degrees. And of course, you ask yourself, well, how did we get these pictures of the surface of Venus? How were they able to get a lander to land on Venus and get these pictures? Well, the truth is it didn't last long. The Russian lander was only operational for a couple hours after landing, but they were able to get some very good pictures. I've got them up right now, and you can take a look at it. That's the surface of Venus, a rocky planet. And you can see the yellow cloud covering off in the background, noxious gas, a terrible place for any life resembling that we find here on Earth. However, scientists did recently, within the last couple of years, start looking for possible signs of life in the upper atmosphere. The story was kind of hinted at, let's see, the actual press conference, the announcement in conjunction with the paper in the Nature Science Journal came out. It'll be 2 weeks ago, this coming Monday, and then the week leading up to it, the Royal Astronomical Society and the American Astronomical Society announced that the presser was coming. It was going to be a big deal, and then Sunday the news actually leaked. I was kind of surprised at that. I wasn't expecting that. I can't remember news leaking out regarding something scientific to this level coming out in advance. Of course, like with a lot of other things, there are news embargoes, but this news leaked, and we were aware of it the Sunday before, the day before the announcement. And when the news did break, it made headlines around the world. And basically, New York Times covered, everybody covered. It was one of the top news stories of the day. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a big deal. Thank you for having educated us on that topic. Wanted to ask Tom first, how do you feel about the possibility of life on other planets, namely Venus? This was a trending topic, news cycle that just ended recently. It seems very interesting and sci-fi related, but it is within the realms of a realistic possibility. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's extremely good that the scientists are able to gather physical data, spectroscopy and other means that they can evaluate, and they can evaluate this data and draw some conclusions or hypotheses from the data that they're seeing. So it is, this notion is based on data that they've gathered. Now, as we know, Venus is an extremely hostile environment compared to Earth. And now I'm not a biologist, but it's hard for me to understand how any life could develop under any circumstances on a planet that's hot. Perhaps long ago, the planet was cooler and some bacteria did develop. Now, we all know that the higher you go in our atmosphere, the cooler it gets. So if there is bacteria living, it's in the upper reaches of the Venusian atmosphere, and apparently only in one part of it. So it's certainly a possibility, and I think because of the sophisticated means that scientists have to evaluate planets, that they can consider this and see if they duplicate the findings and see if there develops a scientific consensus on this. And it's possible there could be a consensus that they believe that it's more likely than not that these chemicals are arising out of bacterial life.
Yeah, I can hear a collective scream of happiness from some of the scientists worldwide if they actually confirm that to that degree. Wanted to ask you, Steve, about this topic. What are your thoughts on life actually on Venus?
Are you ready?
I am ready. Hit us with it, Steve.
Remember the context from which I look at all of this, right? NASA, meaning people within NASA, certainly higher up, has known about the extraterrestrial presence since the day it was born in 1958. They've always known. So in addition to NASA's role as the civilian space agency to explore space and do its thing, which was fun, with using known human technology, they had another role. They had to service the truth embargo in this way, in that even by 1958, the evidence for this ET reality was being amassed. NICAP was in high dungeon. McDonald was doing his work. Kia was doing his work. It was happening, and of course the ETs were coming and going and being seen, and there's not a damn thing they could do about it. So one of NASA's roles is to try to mitigate the pressure that the government, particularly the DoD, was going to get about this phenomena, and it got a lot of pressure. So how could NASA help? Well, it's pretty simple. One, set up SETI. So they helped to set up SETI. They brought in some people. They did it. We know some of the founders, but NASA was critical to that and did a lot of the funding initially. And SETI was designed to search for extraterrestrial signals in the sky, even though they knew the ETs were already here. Now, why would they do that? Because if you're searching for extraterrestrial signals in the sky, then clearly you're showing that you have an interest in the fact that there may be life out there, and you're willing to look for it. And so, hey, we're doing what we can here. Don't tell us about what you saw last week or this evidence or that case or whatever. We're doing our best, all right? And so essentially SETI, for this entire time, whether it was funded by the government or by private funds, was a front organization, a beard for the truth embargo. It has been the greatest scientific fraud in the history of all science, which doesn't mean that they didn't develop some radio telescopy, that they didn't provide some technology that could be used in other ways. But on the fundamental premise of looking for ET signals, it is the greatest scientific fraud in history. Now, what else did NASA do? Well, you got to drop some breadcrumbs, all right? Little here and a little there, paced out, just to keep reminding people that we are concerned. What I mean by breadcrumbs? One of the most significant ones, one of the best known, was the 1997 Mars meteorite. Okay. Wow, we've got a meteorite here. We've clearly identified it as being from Mars, and we found stuff through electron microscope that seems to indicate fossils. It could be a proof that there was life on Mars. Huge press, big press conference. It was all staged. Whole thing was put on, a lot of coverage, and then it just kind of faded down. And then over the years, there's the water on Mars thing, keeps coming up. Well, got a hint here, got a hint there, completely ignoring the fact that Garvin's experiment pretty much confirmed there was life on Mars decades ago, but they had to suppress that. And then there's life, microbes are clinging outside the International Space Station, wow. And there's evidence of panspermia, wow. And they're just dropping these breadcrumbs. And most of the people in the field that I deal with, I think, are in the same mind, that this was an acclimatization process. In other words, a slow drip, not only to let you know we care, but also to slowly advance public awareness so they wouldn't be too upset when finally they learn, oh my God, they've been all over the damn planet for decades, right? Because we're so tender in our sensibilities, so easy to be disrupted and made uncomfortable by bad news. Okay, well, something interesting has happened. And here's what has happened. While for decades it was NASA, by and large, though occasionally some other scientific entity like the institute there at Stanford would say something, drop a breadcrumb. It was acclimatizations, nice and slow, no hurry. And then what happens? The TTSA shows up, and before you know it, things start to pick up speed. And before you know it, we're heading towards these hearings. We're heading towards disclosure. And so the scientific community in NASA is in the reverse position. Instead of dropping slow drips to keep us happy, they suddenly have got to get in the game. They got to up their game because they've got to get stuff out because they're running out of time. And NASA is going to have a massive public relations program when disclosure takes place. You don't think all of this isn't going to come out? You don't think we're going to learn about this whole fraud? And a lot of the people are dead, but a lot of people are still alive. And it's going to be very uncomfortable. So NASA needs to help. It needs to get going. Phosphine on Venus? Perfect. What did they do? They announced phosphine on Venus. Then very quickly mentioned that, just happened to mention that The only way they know phosphine can be created is from living matter. That was interesting. Okay. Totally safe. Not going to have any Venusians turning up tomorrow, but pretty significant. Generated a lot of news. So here's my prediction. They're running out of time. And so they're going to have to throw some serious breadcrumbs up between now and the hearings, which I think are coming. What would be the next breadcrumb? What would be the butte? Well, guess what? There is a rover headed for NASA right now. It launched in July. It's called Perseverance. It replaces Curiosity. It will land on Mars in February, probably before these hearings get underway. And guess what? Wouldn't it be kind of cool if that rover just kind of cruised on out, kind of cruised on by a fairly substantial boulder, and boom, up front, 4K image of an absolute, clearly defined sculpture. Boom. Guess what? NASA just confirmed that there's been an ancient civilization on Mars, been around 1 billion years, and here is the confirmation, right? That would be pretty cool. Look for that to happen, right? Now, between now and that rover arriving, I think you're going to see a couple of more breadcrumbs drop. Watch for them, and when they drop, I want you to think of me, okay? Right? In my context. I know you will.
Well, thank you for that. And by the way, just wanted to mention some quick facts regarding the Perseverance rover. The NASA Science Mars-related website has a page up regarding the countdown to landing for Perseverance and on Mars. And so that would be 144 days, 20 hours, and right now until Perseverance actually lands on Mars. The main job of Perseverance rover will seek signs of ancient life, as Steve was just talking about, and collect rock and soil samples for possible return to Earth. And launched, it says July 30th, 2020, launch location, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, Florida. Landing would be February 18th of 2021, and the landing site would be on the Jezero Crater, Mars. And it says a mission duration at least 1 Mars year, which would be 687 Earth days. Now, before we wind down from the show,
I do want to go into a little bit of detail regarding the actual Nature article from the team of scientists about this, because it was very interesting how they came to their conclusions and how they ultimately decided to go ahead and do this paper and how that ties into UFOs. So this won't take too long. But basically, from the article, the presence of pH3 is unexplained after exhaustive study of steady-state chemistry and photochemical pathways with no currently known abiotic, that means non-life, production routes in Venus's atmosphere, cloud surface, and subsurface, or from lightning, volcanic, or meteoritic delivery. It could originate from unknown photochemistry or geochemistry, or by analogy with biological production of pH3 on Earth from the presence of life. An ideal biosignature gas would be unambiguous. A living organism should be its sole source, and it should have intrinsically strong, precisely characterized spectral transitions, unblended with contaminant lines, criteria that are not usually all available. And then basically how they determined and confirmed that they did have these phosphine findings from the atmosphere on Venus. They started with the James Clerk Maxwell telescope in Hawaii, and what they did is they observed Venus over 5 mornings in June 2017, saw candidate pH3 1.1 absorption with the signal-to-noise ratio varying depending on the velocity interval selection. The feature is consistent with Venus's velocity. This potentially allows for the feature to be a weak residual artifact or a transition of another molecule at a nearby wavelength. They sought to confirm that finding from the Maxwell telescope and used the Atacama Large Array Millimeter Submillimeter Array in March of 2019. The ALMA data confirmed the detection of absorption at the pH3 1-0 wavelength. And finally, for robustness, they considered the possibility of a double false positive where a negative dip occurs in both data sets near the Venusian velocity. Comparing the data before the final processing step of polynomial fitting takes place. They got a figure. I don't have that in the presentation here, but they provided a figure. It shows that no other coincidences of absorption line like features occur in the Maxwell or the ALMA spectra. So basically, they've got remote sensing data from two different significant telescope setups in different parts of the world, and basically found the same thing, that phosphine gas is in there. Of course, it's interesting from a scientific standpoint. We think they've got it. The phosphine gas is there. Of course, they were very careful to say this doesn't mean life. It's just that they don't know any other way other than life to produce this level of phosphine gas. So that's basically their findings. And I think what is interesting is we've got all this remote sensing data from different radar installations, radar setups, like with the Nimitz case, the E-2 Hawkeye plane, as well as the Princeton ship, which had its own radar, multiple radar sets finding these UFOs traversing the skies. So we've got the same kind of physical evidence, not infrequently from two different setups, again, providing the same sort of readings. I would submit that we've actually got better evidence that some of these UFOs are extraterrestrially piloted than we do for finding life on Venus. I just want to get your thoughts on that, Tom and Steve.
Well, Frank, let me quickly comment. The most important phrase in that summation is no abiotic pathway to phosphine. Now, how many Americans you think know what the hell no abiotic pathway means? Of course they don't. However, one of the articles that was written about it translated it for us. It means only life could create phosphine gas.
Right.
So nicely done, right? I'll give them some credit on that. But be assured that if phosphine was not a powerful indicator of life, and they just found another chemical in the atmosphere, do you think they'd have made a big announcement about that?
No, of course not.
Right?
Of course not.
Nobody cares, except, of course, this is a breadcrumb, and it's a pretty good breadcrumb. But I'll tell you something else. One last thing. I'll let Tom talk. Is the landing and timing of both the 180-day deadline on the appropriations bill for reporting, as well as the landing of the rover in February, have gotten my attention. However, sometimes landings don't go well. And so for that reason, I'm pretty sure NASA's got a couple more good breadcrumbs up its sleeve. They're going to drop on us between now and the end of the year, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with.
All right, Tom, how do you feel about what Frank just elaborated on there?
Sounds like they know what they're talking about. I think that the mainstream science groups like these, the National Academy of Sciences or whatever, when they come out with an announcement or an assertion, they must feel like they have solid information and that the proper scientific procedures and protocols have been followed. But at the same time, a big part of science is duplication of results. And so there will be other scientists, I'm sure, going in and studying the information that's been brought to our attention and see if they come to the same conclusions. And it is encouraging. And, anything is possible in this world. It sounds bizarre to me that there are bacteria floating around in the upper reaches of the Venusian atmosphere, but who knows? Anything's possible.
Yeah, with that, I'd like to, unless Frank has anything else.
Yeah, just one last point. If we do discover life at whatever level on some other body within our solar system, it's a pretty good indicator that life really is ubiquitous throughout the galaxy and by extension throughout the universe. It would be an extraordinary find, no doubt about it.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Frank. And I would like to mention one other thing that I failed to mention before, and that is if you look at the topic of UFOs, you can also look up on Wikipedia an investigation of UFOs, and it's a very long list. that indicates going back decades. Really interesting, serious investigations into UFOs on Wikipedia. So on that note, I'll go ahead and end our show and thank our guest. Tom is from Silver Springs, Maryland, and is a member of MUFON. He's on the board of MUFON, and a UFO researcher specializing in the topic of Majestic 12. And by the way, Tom, you've been with MUFON for many years. How many years have you been with MUFON?
Since 1995.
Okay. And
25 years.
We appreciate you very much, and thank you for having come on our show today. We really love having you on our show, and wanted to recommend to folks to please go to Tom's wonderful blog that he has. He works very hard on. It's called tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com. That's tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com. Tom just wrote a really fascinating article on the topic of MJ-12 recently. It's called MJ-12, the Counterintelligence Angle, and that came out on 9/10 of September. Obviously, but of this year. So 9/10/2020 is when he published that article, which really enjoyed thoroughly, and wanted to thank Stephen Bassett, who is the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, and he founded that in 1996 to end a government-imposed embargo on the truth behind in extraterrestrial-related phenomena. And he has spoken to audiences around the world about the implications of formal disclosure by world governments of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race, and given over 1,000 radio and television interviews. I actually suspect it's 10 times more than that, Steve. But
no, it's not 10 times. It's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, but I lost track.
But who's counting? And if you want to check out Steve's website, which he also works extremely hard on to the benefit of the UFO community, please do go to it. I will mention the URL as I did before, but you can learn an awful lot about the UFO topic if one were to actually go through his website. He has actually added some really astounding topics that are really worth your time. Please do check it out. It is www.paradigmresearchgroup.org. That's www.paradigmresearchgroup.org. And he also does, of course, publish topics on congressional hearings related to the UFO topic, and any speaking events and schedules that he has regarding the UFO topic. So we thank you both for having been on our show today, and also want to thank my co-host Frank Stalter. It's wonderful being able to be back on the show with you again after many months.
You're back in the saddle again.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
This was a lot of fun.
Doing all that 6 months. What were you up to? Shenanigans, I'll bet.
I was enjoying life with my family. So, yeah. So, but thank you so much, gentlemen. We look forward to asking you back on the show again in the future. And also, I know I just would like to throw in a wild card here and mention something we all know, and that is this year has been extremely challenging for everybody worldwide. And that now we have the election that will be coming up soon. And so I know this year is going to be a very interesting year, and I hope to cover that with Frank and both of you in the future. So look forward to talking to you all again. And Frank, thank you very much for a wonderful show tonight.
Absolutely, Chant. Glad to have you back on board. And Steve and Tom, thanks so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I had a blast with this particular show. It went a little bit differently than I was expecting, but this was a blast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
All right,
Get out and vote, folks. This is a good time to join MUFON too, by the way. Very good time.
And thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and we will be back as soon as we've got another show ready to go. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, and have a great night. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.